Imagine what's possible when learning doesn't get in the way of life. At Capella University, our game-changing FlexPath learning format lets you set your own deadlines so you can learn at a time and pace that works for you. It's an education you can tailor to your schedule. That means you don't have to put your life on hold to pursue your professional goals. Instead, enjoy learning your way and earn your degree without missing a beat. A different future is closer than you think with Capella University. Learn more at capella.edu.
Hey there, Duke fans, and welcome to episode number 79 of DBR Bites, the Duke Basketball Roundup. We are coming to you, we're on the second day of 2025. You probably missed us over the holiday, but we are back full steam ahead because so is Duke. We are recording on Thursday, January 2nd. Before we get into everything, first of all, I am Donald Wine. I'm your host for this episode. I have a very tired Jason Evans with me because Jason and I have been working all morning. January 1st is done. We are back to work, aren't we, Jason?
Yes, yeah. You and I were talking sort of off camera about it's been it's been a busy couple days as the holidays have wrapped up and we have begun getting back into our real lives and also has begun getting back into Duke basketball, playing big time games as we got one of those this weekend.
Yeah, very quickly, Jason. I don't know when we get this thing out, but since it's before the Gator Bowl tonight, I would be remiss if I didn't issue a programming note for everybody. The Gator Bowl will not be on at 7:30 p.m. It has been pushed back to 8:05 p.m. Eastern time. It will be after the Sugar Bowl. Of course, the Sugar Bowl was postponed today due to the really, really tragic events that took place down on Bourbon Street in New Orleans. On New Year's Eve, we send our wishes to everybody down there. But of course, and football kind of pales in comparison to what is going on down there. Jason, I know as a CNN guy, you have been in the thick of that
Yeah.
for the last couple of days, unfortunately. But I just want to make sure everyone knows it's still going to be on ESPN. It's going to be after the Sugar Bowl is done. But if the Sugar Bowl kind of goes to overtime, like the Peach Bowl did yesterday, just check to see your local listing, see where they will put it on, probably an ESPN2 or ESPN Plus until that game is done. But we are here. We will recap that game some point over the weekend. We are here to preview the basketball game that will also take place this weekend. That is against the SMU Mustangs out of the ACC. We have to repeat that. The SMU Mustangs are in the ACC. This is a conference game, ladies and gentlemen. It will be Saturday, 2:15 Eastern Time tip-off on the CW network. So again, look for that on your television. It's not on ESPN. It is on the CW. Jason, before we get into the record and who they've played, I did want to note, and I know you have a couple of comments on this, that you kind of hinted at the end of the last episode that this is the first game of kind of a two-game to three-game stretch where we play teams inside the KenPom Top 100. We will be at SMU. Then we look forward to home games against Pitt and Notre Dame next week. I think people should realize that in this talk about quad one and quad two wins, which you'll explain a little bit further, there may not be few of those left. But when it comes to the KenPom Top 100, which is what you and I like to rely on, we renewed our subscription, so at least we're with KenPom for one more year as far as being a big part of the show. But there's two other like 3-game stretches that we have this year after this one where we play teams inside the top 100. Of course, we have the Big Four tournament, which will be at Wake versus NC State and versus UNC. There's a 3-game stretch where we play the state tournament there. And then March 1st to March 8th at the very end of the season, we have FSU and Wake at home. And then, of course, we travel to UNC. So this is an interesting thing because it feels like once a month, right? Like we have one kind of at the beginning of the ACC season, one smack in the middle of the ACC season, and one at the very end of the ACC season, where we have these kind of tougher stretches where we play teams that are in the top 100 of KenPom. But as I know you want to talk about, that is a little bit different than the quad one wins that we see in the net. And those are ever so important when we talk about where we want to be in the NCAA tournament, which is a 1 seed or even a 2 seed. So what are you seeing now from our stretch coming up? Because I think these next couple of games are really going to be something that really shapes what quad one wins we have and what quad two wins we have.
Yeah, the reality is, and you and I have discussed this a little bit on this podcast, Duke just doesn't have a lot of opportunities left for wins that will impress the tournament selection committee. We have already played 5 games against quad 1 opponents. And the quadrants, I'm not going to get into the whole thing about the quadrants. It has to do with whether you're at home, on the road, at a neutral site. But basically, it's a game where the tourney selection committee says, these are big time opponents. These are important games, and they really, especially when you're talking about the top seeds, they pay careful attention to how teams do in quad 1 opportunities. And Duke is 3-2 on the year. We have wins at Arizona and at Louisville, plus that home win over Auburn. And we have losses at Kansas and to Kentucky in Atlanta. So Duke is 3-2 in quad 1 games. On the broadcast over the weekend, Donald, you couldn't see it because you were at the game, but they very briefly put up a graphic showing Duke's remaining schedule. Now, this doesn't include the ACC tournament, but Duke's remaining regular season schedule only has 5 more quad 1 games on that schedule. That means that at the most, coming into the ACC tournament, Duke is going to have played a total of 10 quadrant 1 games. And again, this is like something hugely important to the NCAA tournament selection committee in terms of deciding who the best teams are. The remaining quad 1 games that Duke has are at Clemson, at UNC, Illinois, neutral game, Pitt at Duke, which is coming up in less than a week, and the game this weekend at SMU. 5 quadrant 1 games, and the game at SMU this weekend is one of them. Like I said, Duke is currently 3-2 in quadrant 1 games. If Duke only goes, let's say, 3-2 over those remaining 5 games, we'd have a quad 1 record of 6-4. I'm just telling you, we wouldn't get a number 1 seed with that record. I really don't think so. I don't think that if Duke is 6-4 in quad 1 games, they're going to get a number 1 seed. Now, again, we may get another chance or 2, probably at the most 2 chances at a quad 1 game in the ACC tournament, assuming we win it. But I mean, it's going to be a challenge for Duke to get enough quadrant 1 wins to really impress the committee. Really quick, Donald, last year, the number 1 seeds were Houston, UConn, Purdue, and UNC. Houston and UConn each had 17 quad 1 wins. 17! Purdue had 15. UNC only had 10, but UNC was 10-4 in quad 1 games. Very good record. There's no way Duke's just not going to get to 10 quadrant 1 wins. Even if we run the table, there's only it would take just the right matchup in the ACC semifinals. We could win all our remaining games. And it's entirely possible we will only have 9, maybe 10 total quadrant 1 games. Quadrant 1 wins. I apologize. It would be 12 quadrant 1 games if we got that far. So I just need to stress to everyone that this is a huge, huge game for Duke against SMU. And it is also one of the toughest games left on our schedule. It's like the second or third toughest game left for Duke in this entire season. So I know it's early January, and I know that you never want to be like, oh, this one's really important when there's a ton of games left to be played. But this one's really important, even though there are a ton of games left to be played.
Yeah, and the other thing about it is you look at the middle of the ACC and you look at teams that we've played recently, even in the non-conference schedule. Take, for example, a George Mason, right, who is barely just maybe creeping on the doorstep of the top 100 KenPom. Those are the teams you need to look out for, because what we want them to do is we want to beat them, and we want them to be really, really good after we beat them, because the net is updated daily. So yes, what we are seeing right now, there's only 5 or so games left in quad 1. Keep in mind that teams like Maryland have already played 10 games in 10 quad 1 games already. And they have more to come because they're in the Big 10 or the SEC or the Big 12. That is what the ACC as a whole, not just Duke, is up against. Is the fact is we won't have that many opportunities unless some of these teams get hot after we play them. SMU is not one of those teams. We hope that they can stay in the thick of things throughout the season, but this is a big game, as you mentioned, Jason, and we really want to beat them. And it's also one that, as we said, kind of alluded to in the last show, this is their introduction to the ACC for real, and they want to be introduced in a very big way. We need to try and stop them on the road. Let's get into the SMU Mustangs, what they've done so far this year. 11-2 in the season, 2-0 so far in conference. KenPom, they are rated 43rd, and in the net, they're rated 30th. So as we mentioned, a big quad 1 game. They have 2 top 100 KenPom wins. That is by 17 against Washington State and by 10 to LSU. They also have a couple of other big, decent wins against UVA and Boston College. Their only losses are to Butler by 11 and Mississippi State by 5. Those aren't slouch games. Both teams very, very good, and those losses aren't going to be viewed as bad losses by any stretch. And I think, Jason, the one thing that we need to think about with this game, we've already been on the road twice in the ACC, which I think is great. We've gotten some of that off our back. But again, as we've mentioned, this is the start of the real meat of the ACC season, 2 to 3 games in a 7-day stretch. Having this one be on the road means we got to level up a bit. ACC road games, they feel harder because of the intensity that the crowd brings, knowing that Duke is in town. This is also ratcheted up a bit because SMU is new to the conference, and SMU wants to. Their program hasn't been great of late, but they've had some pedigree back in the day. Remember, is what 5 or 6 years ago that they had Larry Brown as a coach, right?
Yeah.
Semi Ojeleye, I believe, transferred to SMU from Duke and ended up in the NBA. So they've had some guys.
He had a great season for them. He really did.
Great season with them, and used that to springboard to a pretty decent career, mainly with the Boston Celtics. I think this program is wanting to take the next step and become a perennial power in the ACC, and they realize that opportunity, just like on the football side, that the door is open for them to step in and be one of these top teams throughout the rest of the season. So we need to be ready for that. We need to be ready for the intensity that they're going to bring, that their fans are going to bring, and that's not going to stop. So we just need to get familiar with this. So Jason, let's get into what they do on offense and defense, and I will start with the offense. Or actually, no, I'll take you. Do you want to start with offense or defense? Because I think there's a couple things that you can talk about on either side of the ball.
Yeah, I'm going to start with the offense. They're truly outstanding. You mentioned that they're Ken Palm's number 43 team. Their offense is ranked in the top 20 in the country. So we're talking about a team that is really good at offense. They're a hell of a shooting team. They hit better than 39% of their three-point shots. Wow. That's 39%. I mean, like, that's what we dream about at Duke. And these guys are already doing it. 39% on their threes. Part of why they're really good, by the way, at shooting threes is that they're really selective. They don't take bad shots from the perimeter. Their three-point field goal rate, meaning how often they shoot threes compared to twos, is 276th in the country. So they mostly look for two-pointers first, and then they turn, if they are open, to taking shots from three. They're a good team from two-point range, from inside, from the paint and the such, shooting a little bit above 55%. Good, but not great. By comparison, like Duke hits better than 57% of our two-point field goals. So they're at 55. They're just a little bit worse than Duke on two-point field goals. One of the other things they do really, really well, SMU, they draw a ton of fouls. They're top 30 in the land at getting to the free throw line. They score a lot from the free throw line. And this is a great offensive rebounding team. Perhaps the thing they do best of anything on offense is offensive rebounding. Wait for the number. They grab almost 40% of their missed shots.
It's kind of what we were doing last year for a large stretch of the season, right? There's point that was the only thing we could do, right? Was get offensive rebounds.
Yeah. So they grab almost 40% of their missed shots. That is the 9th best offensive rebounding rate in the land. Duke must battle them on the boards. We cannot let them get extra shots against us. They're a little bit below average, not terrible, but a little below average at turnovers. We should be able to get some steals on these guys, perhaps turn it into easy points. That could be important to note. And the last thing about their offense is they play really fast. They're among the top 40 fastest paces on offense, not the whole game, but just on offense. They play really fast on offense. And it can be very interesting to see how that plays out, whether they are patient against a Duke team that forces teams to play super slow. Donald, on defense, Duke is the 3rd slowest team in all of college basketball. We've talked a lot about the fact that we force shot clock violations. Teams are constantly looking up and they shot clock 5, 4, 3, and they're hoisting up a shot because the Duke defense hasn't given them anything good. It will be an important part of this game for SMU if they're able to find the shots they want earlier in the shot clock, because they're not a team that's used to playing with that shot clock winding down against them at all. Let's get to their defense really quick.
Real quick, Jason, on the offense of the tempo part. I think the tempo part that you mentioned is very important. The fact that they are, quite quick on offense. If you think about the number of possessions in a basketball game, and I know we've done this stat from time to time, Duke has been very slow, or at least much slower than SMU because of the fact that teams love to try and grind us down when when they have the ball. It's usually we want to go fast.
I don't know that they're grinding us down. It's that they can't find a shot.
No, that's what I mean, right?
Yeah.
Like they're like our offense wants to go fast, and usually we're playing an offense that wants to go slow. So it kind of averages out, and in that sort of thing, because we're so good at defense and forcing teams to go all the way down to almost zero to find a shot, we're having our number of possessions go down. The first 3 games of the season, we were over 70 possessions, and since then we haven't cracked the 70 mark. Now, SMU, I believe, has like 7 times that they have gone over 70, and they even have one where they went over 80. And in all those games, Jason, they won. So they want to push the tempo a little bit. We want to push tempo on offense. So it's going to be interesting to see who wins out here when we try to, grind them to not necessarily grind them to a halt on defense, but really for us trying to limit the number of shots that they're able to take. Because again, if they miss them, they're very good at offensive rebounds. A frenetic tempo allows teams to get more offensive rebounds.
All right, so now let's get to the defense. They're ranked 94th in Ken Pom on defense. I mentioned top 20 offense, barely a top 100 defense. They do an excellent job at defending the paint, though. They don't give up easy 2-point shots. Their opponents only hit 43% of their 2-point shots. Really excellent. Top 15 in the country at defending 2-point shots on the inside. But they're not very good at forcing turnovers at all. And even though they prevent 2-point shots, they're not a particularly great shot blocking team. They're very experienced, by the way. They only have 1 freshman on their roster. I'll have more on him a little bit later when we talk about the players. 0 sophomores. 1 freshman, who, by the way, is 20 years old. He's not the age of a freshman. And 0 sophomores. This is a very experienced team full of guys. We've had this before, Donald. Lots of 5th-year seniors. A lot of guys on this club who are 22, 23 years old compared to Duke's young guys. They're also a very, very deep team. They're more than happy to play like 9+ guys. No one, not a single player on this team, averages more than 28 minutes per game. So it's a very interesting, deep, team where they're very comfortable playing together, even though a lot of them are transfers and things like that. They work guys in and out left and right and have no trouble with that. And they've been really good on the season so far.
I think the one thing about their defense is kind of like us. They have been good at forcing teams to shoot later in the shot clock. And, while they aren't the best defense, I think they have a couple of things where, as you mentioned, they do excel in. I think the fact that they limit points in the paint is one thing that's not necessarily a concern, but something to watch out for, because as we've seen for us over the last couple of games, we've had a lot more action in the paint with Cooper Flagg, Con Knipple, Kamen Malawach, and even guys like Malik Brown and Sion James getting to the rack and laying it in. I wonder how that is going to look. That's going to be an interesting matchup. Let's take a quick break. On the other side, we'll talk more about the individual players, and we'll look out for some of the matchups to watch in this game this weekend. So stick around. All right, we are back, and Jason, we are continuing our preview of the SMU Mustangs, and we've talked about the offense and defense. I know you've looked at the players. Give us a look at who we can expect to see on the floor for SMU on Saturday afternoon.
Well, if you're a Duke fan and you watched Duke play basketball last year, then you will recognize the best player on this SMU team. It is Wake Forest transfer, Kevin Boopy Miller. Boopy Miller, a 6'0 point guard, averaging better than 15 points per game, almost 6 assists per game. He was very good for Wake Forest last year. Was one of the guys that really gave Duke trouble when we lost that game to them. And in some ways, he's almost having a better season this year at SMU. His assists are way up. His scoring is about the same, but his shooting splits are down a good bit. And that's the one thing, he would, if he was shooting the way he shot at Wake, he'd probably be averaging like 18 points per game. He's only hitting 42% of his shots from the field, just 28% from 3. This is a guy who's been a career like 35+% 3-point shooter, sometimes up around 37, 38%, and he's only at 28% this year. You know that by the end of the season, he's probably going to boost his 3-point percent. Like we have enough, we've seen enough of Boopy Miller to know
Right.
what that guy's capable of doing. He's not a 28% 3-point shooter. I would just like to say that I hope that he doesn't revert to the mean against Duke. Let's wait later in the season. Boopy, you can go ahead and have those games, have that 5 of 7 game that is in you. But let's not do it against Duke. Is that a deal? Okay, thanks. The really elite 3-point shooter on their team. I mentioned Boopy's only shooting 28%. Wait till you hear about this guy. Chuck Harris, 5th-year senior, started his career at Butler, is now in his 2nd season at SMU. He was a good like 37% 3-point shooter over the rest of his career. This year he has exploded. At the moment, he is 27 of 55 on 3-pointers on the season. That's just a shade under 50%. Wow. It is hard to imagine that he will continue to do that. So if someone's going to revert to the mean, maybe it'll be Chuck Harris. Chuck Harris is due for like a 1 for 7 kind of game. Why don't you do that against Duke? See, I'm manifesting these things, Donald.
There you go. There we go.
It's going to happen. Their best big man. I mentioned Boopy Miller, Chuck Harris. These are the guys from the perimeter who are going to shoot a lot outside. Their best big man is 6'7", 5th-year senior Matt Cross. Checks in at about 230 pounds. He has moved all over the place in his career. I'm not sure if you remember, he was at Miami as a freshman, like back in 2021. He actually played a fair bit for Miami, and then he got injured, and so, and then in the offseason after that year, he decided to transfer to Louisville. So he's been around the ACC. Then he went to UMass for a couple of years before coming over to SMU this year. So 5 years, this is his 3rd team. Dude grabs more than 8 rebounds per game. He is the man who is leading that offensive rebounding that we talked about that's so impressive for SMU, one of the better offensive rebounders in the country. By the way, not just a guy who's chained to the post. He will go outside and shoot threes. Not a ton of them. He's going to take 2, maybe 3 3-pointers a game. But on the season so far, he's hitting close to 40%. So you cannot leave him alone out there. And then the other guy I wanted to highlight, there are, a lot of players that, as I mentioned earlier, this is an SMU team that plays a bunch of different guys. No one plays big, heavy minutes. They've got like 8 guys between 18 and 28 minutes. It's kind of crazy. But the other guy I wanted to highlight is their only freshman. I'm going to try and get his name right. His first name His first name is Samet. His last name is Yigatoglu. I think Yigatoglu. Yeah.
You get to glue.
You get a glue? Okay. You
Yeah.
get a glue? Samet Yigatoglu is from Turkey. My man stands 7'2", 265. There are not many games this season where Kamen Malawach will look across at the guy, across from him and see eye to eye. That's going to happen against Samet Yigatoglu. He's a big boy. He may be a freshman, but he is very experienced. He played in Turkey's top professional league for 2 years before coming over to play college basketball. He's already 20 years old. And he's one of those European players who he looks like, I think he's only 20. He looks like he's 26. I swear to God. I watched some film on this guy. I was like, wait, this guy's a freshman? How is he a freshman? He looks like he's my age practically. He is not just a guy who's going to camp out in the post. He's not going to shoot a lot of threes, but he doesn't mind, going out in the perimeter, setting a screen and roll and stuff like that. He's actually really good at those things. And be careful, because he will yam on you in a big, big way. There's some highlight footage of him that I was just like, oh my goodness. Oh my goodness. I want no part of playing against this dude. He's averaging, he's not overwhelming or anything like that, but he's averaging close to 10 points per game. He's someone to keep an eye on, and it's going to be very interesting to see his matchup with fellow freshman, who's actually the real age, actually even younger than most freshmen, Kamen Malawach.
Yeah, and I think the other thing about Yigatoglu is that he averages 1.3 assists, which you're thinking it's not that many, but for a center it is, because that means he's not only getting the ball in the post and it's a black hole situation where he's just going to go to the basket. He has his head on the swivel. He's looking for his teammates, and he's able to find guys. If he's not going to get the shot off for points. I think, Jason, as we switch to the matchups, I think the interesting thing is it's not necessarily player versus player, but what Duke is going to do versus what SMU likes to do. And you mentioned the fact that they can shoot threes, but they don't take a lot of them. I think there's a lot of teams that shoot a lot of threes and don't make them, and then against us they do make them. I think the one thing that I take over everything is that anytime anyone plays Duke, I almost kind of throw the 3-point shooting out of the window that they've done before because it's almost guaranteed that they're going to start out hot and they're going to go like 8 for 11 to start the game. I just put that in my mind and I hope I'm wrong. So the thing I'm looking at is the perimeter defense. When they do shoot the three, we need to stop them. I think, again, we talked about Jayden Shoot for Virginia Tech, and we talked about how he was going to shoot the three, and if he's lights out, or he's going to be 1 for 6. What did he do? He ended up being 1 for 6 because of Tyrese Proctor and Sion James really leading in that area. But I think the one thing that I would like to see a little bit more, and I saw a little bit of it against Virginia Tech, Mason Gillis and Isaiah Evans with their perimeter defense off the bench because, of course, Proctor and James aren't going to play 40 minutes. So when they're not in the game, we need somebody who's going to be basically keep SMU accountable in the sense that they don't think that they can just rain a few threes down while those guys are off the floor. So whoever's in that game, I want to be able to make sure that they are at bay. And yes, they may be taking a few, but again, if they aren't making them early, maybe they abandon the three like they do in some games, and they're able to kind of focus in on the post. Now, I will say leave the butter at home. We talked about butter flavored rust. Hopefully that is in the past, so I won't dwell on that. But I think the other thing that I would think about is this. There's two more things. One, pass the ball around. SMU's opponents average 57.9% assist ratio. So that's something we're a little bit higher than that for most games. And if we're moving the ball very well, as we've seen, we are closer to 75% assists on made baskets. So I would like to see that. I think the idea is getting the ball around will get us open shots and we'll knock down a lot of them. Getting into foul trouble, I think, is something that's interesting. I know you look at the stat a little bit, but guys who average the number of fouls committed over 40 minutes, they have 3 guys who average over 4 fouls per 40 minutes played, and 2 of them are big men. So I'm like, okay, get the big men in foul trouble, and maybe that post defense that they have, that interior defense that they have, kind of reduces a little bit because those guys have to be careful. Maybe that's an opportunity for Common Malawash to get involved. It's an opportunity for Cooper Flagg and Con Knipple to get to the hole and do what they do. Finally, intensity and urgency. As I've mentioned before, SMU will be ready for this game. They want to make a statement, and we have to meet that moment. This is a new team that we're playing. It's the very first time we're playing them in the ACC, and there's a lot of glitz and glamour on their end about this game that we have not experienced yet. But they also haven't experienced Duke basketball yet. So let's meet the moment and match or exceed their intensity and urgency from the opening tip. If we do, which we have done in the other 2 games, despite the slow starts, if we can match the intensity and the urgency, we can win this game. And we can do it by sending them a statement that, hey, yes, welcome to the ACC. This is your welcome to the ACC moment.
Hey, I wanted to do one last quick thing on their coach, Andy Enfield, who first grew to fame at Dunk City, Florida Gulf Coast, and did some pretty special things there, and then got the job at USC. And he had some really good players and some very good years at USC. And when he decided to leave there and come over to SMU, I think a lot of people thought it was a little bit of a step down. I'm telling you that what I think happened was SMU boosters made it clear to him, we're going to really invest in basketball. The people behind behind SMU athletics raised $100 million to fund their programs and keep everything alive and operating for the first several years while they joined the ACC. Because remember, they have joined the ACC and are not getting a penny of payout from the conference in terms of TV dollars. Part of the way that the ACC is trying to make everybody like Florida State and Clemson happy is that we brought in SMU, we boosted our TV revenue as a result, and SMU doesn't get any of that. I want to say it's like for the first 4 or 5 years, I think, at least.
I thought it was at least 4, but
it may even be 7. I'm trying to remember how it's a while that SMU is basically like, yeah, we're in the conference, but we don't share in any of the riches of the conference. That's how much money they raised. That's how committed these boosters were to getting them to the ACC. It immediately immediately paid dividends with them reaching the college football playoff and having one of the best football seasons they've had in a long time. And I'm telling you, Andy Enfield is at SMU because they've told him they're going to take care of his NIL budget. They're going to take care of this program while they're transitioning to making their full ACC payout. And you can already see it in what they're doing recruiting wise and what they've done with the portal. The guys that they brought in, like Boopy Miller, who they brought in from Wake Forest. They basically bought him off of Wake Forest and brought him over to SMU. And like for next year, Andy Enfield's already signed the number 9 freshman recruiting class in the country, according to 24/7. Number 9. And you know they're going to be involved in the transfer portal again. This is a start to get to know this SMU program. I'm convinced that these guys are going to be. I think Andy Enfield, by the way, is a very good coach. He likes to play a fast, up-tempo style, and it's fun to watch. I think guys are going to want to play for him, and the SMU's going to have the money to bring guys in as well. I just think that this is a program that people need to really be on the lookout for. And last thing I wanted to mention, it's worth noting, they play in Moody Coliseum, which is a small facility. Seats just under 9,000 people, smaller than Cameron. Be on the lookout. It could get really loud.
Yeah, and it's not often that it's full, but it will be full on Saturday. And as I mentioned a couple podcasts ago, some of these programs are built, can be built very quickly with two things: money and motivation. SMU definitely has the motivation, and they damn sure have the money. So look for them to really try to assert themselves. Starting with this weekend, of course, our job is to stop them. That will be a 2:15 p.m. Eastern Time tip-off on the CW network. Jason, before we get out of here, I did want to note another story that came up just a couple days ago that we had been discussing, and that is Leonard Hamilton. Of course, arguably the favorite coach of the podcast that is not a Duke coach. And we love Leonard Hamilton on the show, but Ham's in a little bit of trouble. He's been sued by 6 former players at FSU for $250,000 each over alleged failed NIL payments that were promised to them by him. If you recall, last spring, or I guess last winter in February, we were supposed to play Florida State. We ended up playing them, but as we were about to play them, I believe it was at Florida State.
It was, the game was at Florida State.
Oh, yeah, it was the game that Jared McCain went off like 32 points or something like that, where he just went ham. But before that game, there was word that game may not be played because some of the players were boycotting that game, and they were boycotting the program, and they were upset at different things. And apparently Leonard Hamilton had promised them, hey, if you play this game and stick it out with us, I'll get you some money from the NIL collective to make, appease everybody. And everyone said, cool. 6 players said they were supposed to get $250,000 to stick around and really give it a go. They ended up playing against Duke. We ended up beating them. But those NIL payments never materialized. And so these 6 former players are now suing. Now, why is this important? Well, first of all, it doesn't feel like with what they're doing right now in Florida State has been in a kind of a tailspin as a collective athletic department since they decided to sue the ACC to try and leave. As you know, Jason, they've since tried to backtrack and stick the toothpaste back in the tube and say, no, we were never interested in leaving. All this is about them leaving. But one, it doesn't feel like Leonard Hamilton might be coaching beyond this year, and he knows that this is kind of it for him at FSU. And Lord knows the last thing FSU needs is to spend money defending yet another lawsuit when they're trying to spend more money to defend their exit out of the ACC, and then also to raise the money that will likely be required to get out of the conference and go to the SEC or to the Big Ten. Also, Jason, I think what's important about this, we've seen some NIL lawsuits creep up over the last couple of years, and these guys are taking a big risk. There's 2 guys, Darren Green and Josh Nickelberry, who no longer play in college. They're done with their eligibility. But for Primo Spears, Cameron Fletcher, Deontay Green, and Jalen Worley, those guys transferred out of the program and went elsewhere. But they're taking a big risk by engaging in the lawsuit. I remind you of a player from UNLV, the quarterback, Matt Sluka, who in week 3 sued and left the program and basically opted out and said, I'm redshirting because he had not been paid his NIL money. He entered the transfer portal back in September. He is still in the transfer portal. because you're kind of starting to see the slimy part of what used to happen under the table at certain schools where people are making promises to get players to schools, and when those promises don't materialize, they still have a little bit of leverage by saying, "Hey, you can transfer if you want to, but you're not going to get a lot of looks because people aren't going to believe that you're going to stick around." And so it's interesting to see how this has come about. The fact that these guys secured other schools before this happened, as opposed to a Matt Sluka who basically said, "I'm suing you now, I'm leaving now, and I'm making myself available for any other team." And he's kind of been blackballed while this is hanging in the balance. So you may see more of this. In fact, I will dare to say you will definitely see more of this because there's going to be some of these NIL payments that don't fully come the way that it was promised or what was agreed upon or what have you. And without transparency, without contracts, this is going to be a murky situation. But I think in this case is no exception, right? Because it feels like it was a verbal promise. Hey, I'll get you your money if you guys just stick with us and keep playing, and that never came. And now they're trying to sue to get that money where there's nothing written down on paper. There's going to be This is where the NCAA, where you and I talked about 4 or 5 years ago, that the NCAA should have created these rules, because rules come with contracts come with obligations, and come with these things that can be written out. When we say, "Hey, I agreed, Jason, that you would not wear this plaid shirt that you're wearing. I have it right here on page 4." You would have that sort of thing. And right now, you're going to see a lot more NIL lawsuits because the murky part of of what was occurring at some schools under the table is now out in the open. And now is going to be on the courts to kind of define how this thing goes from here on out.
The significant thing to me about all this is the fact that the lawsuit was filed against Leonard Hamilton specifically.
Yep.
And that these players are saying that Leonard Hamilton, personally said, "I have business associates who are going to get this money to you guys." That is a involvement in booster related NIL that coaches are not supposed to do. And there's a piece of me, Donald, that wants to be like, really? Really, we're gonna worry about the rules here in what is largely been completely unregulated by the NCAA in a circumstance where it's, functionally essential to a coach's job and success to know which players are going to be in the program, and yet we're going to say, "Oh no, you can't be involved in the compensation aspect of it," which is basically how these guys decide what program to play for. It's absurd. It's ridiculous that the NCAA rules don't allow coaches to be more involved in this. They have to be coaches, and everything about the program has to be hands off. We talk about Rachel Baker and her role in NIL at Duke. Her role in NIL at Duke does not include discussing pay for play. It just, that is where the NCAA has drawn the line. If this lawsuit goes to depositions, if people are under oath and have to talk about this stuff, that could be really, really awkward for Leonard Hamilton. And by really awkward, I mean that could mean NCAA sanctions. Because what these players are saying happened is against the rules. Again, the rules are kind of stupid in this case. The rules need to be revised. The rules need to reflect reality. But the reality is, the rules are the rules. And if you believe even a little bit of what these players are saying went on, then, by the way, they say they have some text messages, I think.
Yes. Yeah. And the ESPN article mentioned text messages. Yeah.
Yeah. They don't have signed contracts and stuff, but they do have some text messages. And if it comes out that Leonard Hamilton was discussing with players getting them certain sums of money, he's going down. That's just, either that or the NCAA is just going to go, "Oh, no, we completely wash our hands of any regulation of NIL, do whatever you want." And if they do decide to do that, that's perfectly fine. But, that will be a sea change in the way schools handle this pay for play NIL.
Yeah, I think the NCAA doesn't like doing much, but they love going after pursuing some of the rules, the very few rules that they got left, and pursuing them aggressively. So, yeah, I think if it gets to a further point, we may see that. But I also think, Jason, what that does also do, if they go on probation, if Leonard Hamilton gets popped for violations and FSU gets put on probation, guess what else that affects? It affects their potential departure from the ACC, because no one's going to take a team that is on sanctions. That's just how it is. And so that is only going to further their bid to try and leave this conference that has kind of been sidetracked by the fact that their football team was terrible this year, and now their basketball team is trying to yes, equal them in certain ways. So we'll leave it there on this episode of DBR Bites. Of course, tonight as we record, good luck to the Duke football team. May they do well against Ole Miss and get that victory. Duke women's basketball is playing at around the same time on ESPN Plus. So if you have the Apple TV app, you can actually watch both. You can start with the basketball game until the football game starts and kind of have the split screen, which is what I'm going to do. So for myself, for Jason Evans, this has been the DBR Podcast, and now it is time for the Duke Band to play us out and take us out.
Man, I'm tired.
You know what I did? I woke up this morning because I had to work, and I do usually I have like an espresso machine, so I have like the pods. And I usually do, I can, on some days I can get away with just like one pod, do a long go and I'm good. Today I was like, I already know it's going to be one of these days. So let me do a pod, basically two pods, but one is just like a very thin espresso line, like a shot of espresso, and then one's like a full cup. So I basically call that 1.5, right? So it's not like it's not a double espresso, but it's a 1.5 shot. And then for lunch, I was like, I don't need any more caffeine, but I still need to pick me up. So I ate lunch, and just before you said, hey, can we jump on? I was like, yo, I'm feeling it. I ate a bag and a half of candy. So I'm wired. How long that will last remains to be seen. But it's been one of those mornings.
Meanwhile, CNN, I get up at 4 a.m. every morning to be in at work by 5. And like the past few days were supposed to be kind of easy because it was mostly all this New Year's bullshit. But this incident in New Orleans, the New Orleans stuff, God, it's just it just means that there's like no break in my day. Usually I have a little bit of time where I'm just sort of like, oh, I'll decompress, whatever. It's been relentless. The coverage has just been, and so I'm really dragging. I'm glad you're up because I'm not.
Well, up is a relative thing. It is definitely boosted by candy and sugar. I'm sorry, caffeine and sugar. And one of those is going to crash out before the other. And the question is, which one?
Yeah.